It was supposed to be the perfect family vacation. But from the very start, this family faced the unimaginable: discrimination, danger, and a shocking betrayal on board. Watch till the end to see how a father's courage and a family's resilience changed everything. Don't miss the twists that will leave you speechless. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe and leave a comment below on where you're watching from. It was the first day of their long-awaited family vacation, a cruise they had planned for months. Judge Michael Turner, a highly respected black man with years of service in the judicial system, had finally carved out time to take his wife, Cynthia, and their 14-year-old son, Samuel, on a cruise through the Caribbean. It was meant to be a peaceful getaway, a chance to disconnect from the pressures of his work and the daily grind of city life. For Michael, this trip was a way to spend quality time with his family, to unwind and enjoy life without the constant demands of the courtroom. As they boarded the ship, Michael couldn't help but notice the grandeur of the vessel. Gleaming white decks stretched before them, with elegant corridors lined with polished railings and luxurious amenities visible at every turn. Cynthia held Samuel's hand as they walked up the ramp, her eyes bright with excitement. She loved the idea of getting away from the world and sailing across the open sea. Samuel, too, seemed captivated by the prospect, his gaze fixed on the towering masts and expansive ocean around them. However, Michael's excitement was quickly marred by a series of unsettling interactions. The first sign of trouble came at the check-in counter, where a clerk barely looked at them as he processed their tickets. The clerk's tone was cold, distant, as though he'd rather be anywhere else than handling their reservation. Michael tried to brush it off, assuming it was just poor customer service, but when they asked for directions to their suite, the clerk responded with a dismissive wave, directing them vaguely down the hall without so much as a glance. "Dad, did you notice how that guy looked at us?" Samuel asked, his voice tinged with confusion. Michael gave his son a reassuring smile. "Sometimes people just have bad days," he replied, though he couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling settling in his gut. He wanted this trip to be perfect, to give Samuel and Cynthia the restful vacation they deserved. As they navigated through the halls, the discomfort grew. Other passengers and staff would stare at them with thinly veiled suspicion, some even moving aside as if they were an inconvenience. When they finally arrived at their suite, a steward was waiting at the door to assist them with their bags. However, unlike the attentive treatment Michael observed other guests receiving, the steward quickly handed over their bags without offering to help them inside. Cynthia looked at Michael, her face shadowed with unease. "Are we imagining things, or—" "I'm not sure," Michael replied, glancing over his shoulder as the steward walked away without another word. "But we'll try to make the best of it. We're here to relax, remember?" She nodded, though a hint of doubt lingered in her eyes. "Let's just enjoy ourselves for Samuel's sake." But the sense of isolation didn't stop there. Over the next few hours, as they explored the ship and tried to settle in, they found themselves repeatedly subjected to rude stares and more dismissive treatment from the staff. Each time they asked for directions or assistance, the responses were curt, sometimes accompanied by barely concealed sneers. At one point, Samuel approached a waiter to ask for a drink, only for the man to scoff and walk away as though he hadn't even heard him. "What's his problem?" Samuel muttered, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Michael's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Don't let it get to you, son," he said, placing a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "We're here to have a good time. Let's not let anyone ruin that for us." They tried to make the best of their first day, but the tension only grew. The family attended the orientation on the main deck, where an officer gave a presentation on safety procedures and cruise activities. Yet, even there, they couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. The officer, leading the session, barely looked at them, his eyes sliding over them as though they weren't even there. Meanwhile, other families were greeted with friendly smiles and personal greetings. As the presentation ended, Michael pulled Cynthia aside, his jaw tight. "This isn't just my imagination, is it?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "No, I wish it was, but it's not." She cast a glance around, noticing the way the staff and passengers seemed to avoid making eye contact with them. "It's like we're invisible." The uncomfortable atmosphere weighed heavily on all of them, especially Samuel. He looked up at his father with a mix of confusion and disappointment. "Why are they treating us like this, Dad? We haven't done anything wrong." Michael took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Sometimes people judge others without reason," he said carefully. "But remember, that says more about them than it does about us. We're here together as a family, and we're going to have a great time despite all this." The family pushed through their discomfort, determined to enjoy the cruise. They tried various activities, visited the game room, and attended a welcome dinner in the dining hall. Yet, even there, the hostility persisted. The waiter assigned to their table was inattentive, hardly ever refilling their drinks or checking on them. Each course was brought with little care, plates clattering onto the table as though they weren't worth the effort. Other guests received far better service, their tables bustling with attentive waitstaff who seemed to be avoiding the turners entirely. As the evening wound down, Michael noticed that Samuel had gone quiet. His shoulders slumped. He watched his son pick at his food, the excitement he'd shown earlier now replaced by frustration and sadness. Michael's chest tightened as he realized how much this experience was affecting him. He had hoped this trip would be an escape, a memory they could cherish, yet it was shaping up to be anything but. When they finally returned to their suite, Samuel spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought this was supposed to be fun. Why do they hate us, Dad?" Michael knelt down beside his son, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes people fear what they don't understand, but don't ever let that make you feel less important. You are an incredible young man, and we are a strong family. Remember that." Cynthia joined them, wrapping an arm around Samuel. "We love you, honey," she said softly, "and nothing they do can ever take that away." In that moment, Michael realized that he couldn't shield his family from everything, but he could at least stand strong beside them. This trip might not be what they'd hoped for, but he was determined to make it a memorable experience, no matter the obstacles. With a sense of resolve settling within him, he vowed to protect his family and ensure they got the vacation they deserved. As they turned in for the night, a lingering worry gnawed at Michael. He couldn't shake the feeling that this hostility was only the beginning, and that they might face even greater challenges on this journey. But for now, all he could do was hold his family close, hoping that the rest of the trip would be kinder to them. The second day of the cruise dawned with the promise of bright skies and calm waters, yet the atmosphere for Michael and his family was anything but serene. After the previous day's string of dismissive encounters, they had hoped for a change, a shift in the attitudes of the staff and passengers around them. However, as they made their way to the breakfast buffet, it became clear that their discomfort was only intensifying. Upon reaching the dining hall, they were greeted by a young hostess who gave them a brief, uninterested glance before looking away. Michael tried to brush it off and greeted her politely, only to be met with a curt nod. She led them to a table near the back of the room, far from the windows and the lively atmosphere surrounding the main area. As they sat down, Michael noticed that other families were placed closer to the view, with the sunlight spilling onto their tables, enhancing the warmth and brightness of the morning. In contrast, their corner felt cold and isolated. Cynthia tried to keep her spirits high, picking up a menu and scanning it with a smile. "Maybe they have that fruit platter you like, Sam," she said, nudging her son. Samuel managed a small smile, but his gaze drifted around the room, noticing the attentive service other tables were receiving. Michael could see the disappointment in his son's eyes and felt a pang of frustration. It was supposed to be a relaxing vacation, yet every gesture, every dismissive look served as a reminder that they were being treated as though they didn't belong. Their waiter approached the table, offering no greeting or introduction. He barely looked at them as he placed the menus on the table and muttered, "I'll be back to take your order." Before anyone could respond, he turned on his heel and walked away. Michael felt his jaw tighten. He exchanged a glance with Cynthia, who sighed and shook her head slightly, as if urging him to stay calm. But as the minutes ticked by, with no sign of the waiter, his patience began to fray. Other tables were already receiving their orders, steaming plates of eggs and toast, glasses of freshly squeezed orange juice. Samuel watched as servers moved around them, his expression growing more disheartened with each passing moment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the waiter returned. His tone was clipped and impatient as he asked, "Are you ready to order?" "Yes," Michael said, keeping his voice steady. He ordered for his family, requesting a simple breakfast of eggs, toast, and fruit. The waiter scribbled their order quickly, still avoiding eye contact, then snatched the menus from the table without a word. As he walked away, Samuel leaned over the table and whispered, "Dad, why is everyone treating us like this? It's not fair." Michael reached out and placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "I know, son. Sometimes people let their own prejudices get in the way of kindness, but remember, it's their problem, not ours." Cynthia offered Samuel a soft smile. "Let's try to enjoy our meal once it comes, okay? We're here together, and that's what matters." But the meal did little to lift their spirits. When the food finally arrived, it was lukewarm, hastily arranged, and lacked the attention to detail that seemed to be afforded to other tables. Michael noticed that their toast was burnt, the fruit platter was missing entirely, and the orange juice tasted watered down. He felt his temper flare but held it back, not wanting to upset Samuel or ruin the morning any further. After breakfast, the family decided to explore the ship. They headed toward the pool area, hoping that a swim might lighten the mood. As they walked across the deck, Michael noticed the same pattern emerging. Subtle, yet unmistakable signs that they were unwelcome. Passengers shot them sideways glances, some even turning their backs as they approached. A few whispered among themselves, their voices lowering as the family passed. When they reached the pool, Samuel ran ahead, eager to dive into the water. But as he approached, a lifeguard stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Hold on there, kid," the lifeguard said, crossing his arms. Samuel stopped in his tracks, looking back at his parents in confusion. Michael and Cynthia hurried over, sensing the tension in the lifeguard's stance. "Is there a problem?" Michael asked, keeping his tone even. The lifeguard shrugged. "Just making sure everyone here is supposed to be in this area," he replied, casting a disdainful look at Samuel. Michael felt a surge of anger but forced himself to remain calm. "We're guests on this ship, just like everyone else. I don't see why there would be any issue." The lifeguard looked away, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Just doing my job," he said, stepping aside, but keeping his gaze fixed on Samuel as the boy entered the pool. As Michael and Cynthia took seats near the edge of the pool, he felt the weight of the lifeguard's gaze still lingering on them, watching Samuel as though he were some sort of intruder. Cynthia reached over and took Michael's hand, squeezing it gently. "Don't let them get to you," she whispered, sensing his frustration. Michael nodded, though the tension in his shoulders remained. He watched Samuel in the water, trying to enjoy himself despite the scrutiny. But the discomfort was evident, and Samuel's usually vibrant energy seemed dulled. The few smiles he managed were brief, often followed by cautious glances around the pool to see if anyone was watching him. Later that day, the family decided to try one of the ship's recreational activities. They signed up for a snorkeling excursion, hoping it would be a chance to explore the ocean and share an adventure together. The guide gathered all participants at the dock, giving instructions and passing out equipment. But as he reached the turners, his demeanor shifted. He handed them their gear with a dismissive expression, barely looking at them as he rattled off instructions. During the excursion, the guide kept his distance from the family, focusing his attention on other participants and offering them pointers and encouragement. Michael noticed that even underwater, Samuel seemed isolated, glancing at the guide for direction only to be ignored. Cynthia tried to make the best of it, pointing out colorful fish and coral to Samuel, who tried to stay positive for his mother's sake. As they returned to the ship, Michael couldn't shake the feeling of anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. He had been patient, had tried to ignore the slights and disrespect, but each interaction was a reminder that they were being treated differently, not for anything they'd done, but for who they were. That evening, the family attended a social event in one of the ship's lounges. It was a chance to meet other passengers, to relax and enjoy some music. Yet, even there, the treatment continued. When Cynthia approached the bar to order drinks, the bartender took his time serving other patrons first, ignoring her until she finally caught his attention with a polite but firm, "Excuse me." He rolled his eyes and poured their drinks with a sullen expression, slamming them onto the counter. As the night wore on, Michael could see that Cynthia and Samuel were growing weary. The constant glances, the quiet snubs, the subtle ways they were made to feel out of place, it was taking a toll. Even Samuel, who usually had boundless enthusiasm, looked tired and frustrated. When they returned to their suite that night, Michael finally let his guard down. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "I wanted this to be a special trip for us, something memorable. I didn't expect all of this." Cynthia placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault, Michael. We didn't choose this treatment, and it doesn't define us. We'll get through it together." Samuel looked up, his young face marked by confusion and sadness. "I don't understand, Dad. Why can't people just be nice?" Michael knelt down beside him, wrapping an arm around his son. "Sometimes people hold on to ideas that make them act in ways that are unfair and hurtful. But we're stronger than that, and no matter what they do, they can't take away our worth or our pride." That night, as they prepared for bed, Michael vowed to shield his family from further harm. He had hoped this trip would be an escape from the daily challenges they faced back home, but it seemed that those challenges had followed them, even into the vastness of the open ocean. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, bracing himself for whatever the next day might bring. Little did he know, their struggles on this ship were far from over. The third day of the cruise began like any other, with sunlight pouring through the small window of their suite. The Turners, despite their experience so far, decided to continue their attempts at enjoying the trip. Samuel seemed determined to shake off the prior day's negativity, and Michael admired his son's resilience. He encouraged Samuel to take part in the swimming activities, hoping the experience would lift his spirits. As they made their way to the open water deck, Cynthia noticed her son's excitement as he watched other passengers dive into the ocean. Samuel had always loved the water and was thrilled at the chance to swim in the open sea. The sparkling, clear water seemed to call to him, and he eagerly prepared to jump in. However, as Samuel approached the edge of the deck, the family's familiar adversary, the lifeguard who had obstructed them at the pool, was stationed nearby. His stern gaze fell upon Samuel with a hint of disdain, watching him closely as though he were waiting for him to make a mistake. Michael noticed this but decided not to confront the lifeguard. Hoping to avoid another conflict, he focused instead on cheering for Samuel, who gave his parents a big excited grin before diving into the water. Samuel swam further out, his excitement mounting as he admired the crystal-clear depths below him. The freedom of the water made him feel light and joyful, a temporary escape from the unfriendly atmosphere on the ship. He was lost in his thoughts, enjoying the sensation of the cool water against his skin, when he heard a loud splash behind him. He turned around, surprised, only to see that it was the lifeguard. The man was swimming close behind, and Samuel immediately sensed something unsettling in the lifeguard's approach. Before he could react, the lifeguard drew near and with a firm grip pushed Samuel roughly further out into the open sea, beyond the boundary of the safety lines. Samuel struggled, disoriented, but the lifeguard gave him one final, hard shove and swam back to the boat without a word. For a moment, Samuel couldn't process what had just happened. His head bobbed above the water as he tried to call out, but his voice was swallowed by the sounds of the waves and the distant noise of the ship. He looked around, feeling a jolt of fear when he realized just how far he was from the safety line. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Samuel noticed a dark shape moving below him. He froze, his heart pounding as he watched the shadow glide beneath the water, closer and closer. His mind raced, struggling to process the situation when the shape emerged just enough for him to see the distinct outline of a massive, white shark. The creature was circling him slowly, as if assessing him, its large fins slicing through the water with predatory grace. A surge of terror flooded through Samuel's body, his chest tightening as panic began to take over. He tried to swim backward, but his arms felt heavy, his movements sluggish as his adrenaline spiked. He could feel his pulse racing, and the overwhelming fear made his blood pressure skyrocket. Suddenly, he felt a trickle of blood drip from his nose, a response to the intense pressure and terror coursing through him. The shark, sensing the faint scent of blood, seemed to grow more interested, its movements becoming faster and more focused. Samuel's mind went blank, consumed by sheer terror. The creature's dark eyes seemed to fixate on him, watching him struggle as it closed the gap between them. His vision blurred, and he fought to stay conscious, his breaths coming in quick, shallow gasps. The realization that he might not make it back to his parents, that he could be lost to the ocean, filled him with despair. Back on the deck, Michael and Cynthia were enjoying the view when Cynthia noticed that Samuel was no longer within the designated swimming area. Panic surged through her as she scanned the water, trying to locate their son. "Michael, where's Samuel?" she asked, her voice trembling with worry. Michael's heart dropped as he too searched the water, his eyes darting across the surface. Then, in the distance, he spotted the faint outline of Samuel's figure, far beyond the safety lines. At that moment, He also noticed the unmistakable shape of the shark circling near their son. Fear gripped him, but his instincts as a father took over. Without a second thought, he sprinted to the emergency equipment, grabbing a harpoon gun that was secured nearby. Ignoring the protests of nearby staff who tried to deter him, Michael shouted, "My son is out there! There's no time to wait!" Without waiting for permission, he dived into the water, the harpoon in hand. He swam with all his strength, his heart racing as he closed the distance between himself and his son. The cold water bit at his skin, but he barely noticed, his focus solely on reaching Samuel before the shark did. As he got closer, he saw the look of sheer terror in Samuel's eyes, the boy's face pale and streaked with blood from his nose. "Hold on, Samuel," Michael called out, pushing himself to swim faster. The shark, sensing the disruption, turned its attention to Michael, pausing its advance as it considered this new arrival. Michael raised the harpoon, his hand steady as he aimed for the predator. With a quick, decisive motion, he fired, the harpoon slicing through the water toward the shark. It struck the creature's side, and with a powerful jerk, the shark darted away, disappearing into the depths. Michael reached Samuel, pulling him close. "I've got you, son. You're safe now," he murmured, relief flooding over him as he clung to his son. Samuel's breathing was shaky, his body trembling as he held on to his father. "Dad, I didn't know if I'd make it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're okay now. I've got you," Michael reassured him, his heart pounding with both relief and residual fear. They swam back towards the ship, where Cynthia was waiting anxiously, her face pale as she watched them approach. As Michael helped Samuel climb onto the deck, she enveloped him in a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God you're okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Staff members began to gather around, some appearing genuinely concerned, while others seemed more interested in containing the situation than providing any real assistance. The lifeguard, however, was notably absent, and Michael's suspicion began to grow. He looked around, his gaze scanning the crowd until he spotted the lifeguard standing at a distance, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. Michael's anger flared. He could see now that this was no accident, that the lifeguard had deliberately endangered his son's life. He clenched his fist, struggling to keep his composure as he pulled Samuel close, refusing to let him out of his sight. As the staff urged the family to come to the medical bay for an evaluation, Michael's mind was already racing. This was not a simple oversight, and he intended to find out exactly what had happened and hold those responsible accountable. For now, though, his priority was Samuel's safety, ensuring his son was physically unharmed before pursuing answers. Inside the medical bay, Samuel was examined by a doctor who cleaned the blood from his nose and assessed him for any other injuries. Michael stayed by his side, his hand never leaving his son's shoulder, offering silent support. He could feel the tension in his son's body, the lingering fear that would likely haunt him long after they left the cruise. As they finally returned to their suite, Michael sat down beside Samuel, who remained quiet, his gaze distant. Cynthia placed a comforting arm around their son, whispering soothing words as she stroked his hair. Michael leaned forward, his voice low and firm. "Samuel, I promise you, I won't let them get away with this. What they did, it was wrong, and they will face the consequences." Samuel looked up at his father, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. He nodded, though the fear in his gaze hadn't entirely faded. "Thank you, Dad. I just don't understand why they did it." Michael wished he had an answer, but all he could do was hold his son close, reassuring him that they would get through this ordeal together. Michael sat beside his son, unable to shake the rage that simmered beneath his calm exterior. The night after the shark incident had been restless. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Samuel, alone and terrified in the water, with the predator circling him, the lifeguard's indifferent face haunting his thoughts. This had been no accident, and Michael was certain of it. In the morning, he went directly to the ship's administration to demand a formal investigation. Cynthia stayed with Samuel in their suite, comforting him while Michael made his case. When he arrived at the main office, he was met with polite but dismissive responses, vague assurances that the issue would be looked into. He could see in their expressions that they had little interest in pursuing the truth. As he walked back to their suite, the indifference of the staff gnawed at him. This was more than an incident at sea. It was a threat to his family's safety, and no one seemed to care. Determined to take matters into his own hands, Michael decided to seek out the lifeguard who had shoved Samuel into danger. The lifeguard was back on duty by the pool, lounging with an air of nonchalance that made Michael's blood boil. Michael approached, keeping his voice level but firm. "I'd like a word with you." The lifeguard looked up, unfazed, and offered a faint, mocking smile. "What can I do for you, sir?" Michael's jaw clenched. "I think you know exactly what this is about. You endangered my son yesterday, pushed him beyond the safety line right into the path of a shark. What were you thinking?" The lifeguard shrugged, his expression neutral. "Kids wander off all the time. It's hard to keep an eye on everyone." "Don't insult my intelligence," Michael said, his voice like steel. "You know exactly what you did, and I want answers now." The lifeguard's smirk widened slightly, a flash of contempt in his eyes. "Look, I don't have to explain myself to you. I'm just here to do my job." Michael felt a surge of anger but kept his composure. "If you think you'll get away with this, you're mistaken. I'll see to it that an investigation is conducted, and I won't rest until you're held accountable." The lifeguard's face darkened for a moment, but he quickly masked it with indifference. "Good luck with that, Judge," he said, the last word laced with mocking emphasis. Michael turned and walked away, his mind already working on the next steps. He wasn't about to let this man's arrogance go unanswered. Back in their suite, Michael shared the interaction with Cynthia. "He's hiding something," he said, his voice steady but tense. "This wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate. I'm going to find a way to prove it." Cynthia squeezed his hand, her expression one of fierce determination. "Whatever you need to do, I'm with you. We'll get justice for Samuel." Later that day, Michael began gathering testimonies from other passengers, hoping someone had seen the incident and could corroborate his story. However, he quickly realized that most people were unwilling to get involved. Some were polite but distant, others avoided eye contact, and a few even excused the lifeguard's behavior, claiming that kids just need to be watched more carefully. Michael felt frustration mounting, his resolve only growing stronger in the face of the ship's wall of indifference. As evening approached, Michael decided it was time to take a different approach. He requested access to the ship's security footage, reasoning that the deck cameras might have captured the lifeguard's actions. At first, the crew resisted, citing privacy regulations, but Michael refused to back down. After an hour of relentless persuasion, he was finally granted permission to view the footage under supervision. Michael watched the screen intently as the video played. His heart pounded as he saw Samuel on the deck, eagerly preparing to jump into the water. Then, just as he'd described, the lifeguard approached Samuel, appearing to speak briefly before shoving him beyond the safety line. The cold, calculated shove was undeniable. The footage continued, showing the lifeguard swimming back without a second glance, ignoring Samuel's distress entirely. Michael's hands clenched into fists as he replayed the clip. The evidence was indisputable, and he was ready to take action. He requested a copy of the footage, intending to use it as evidence in a formal complaint once they returned to shore. The staff reluctantly agreed, their discomfort evident, but they could no longer deny the truth. With the footage secured, Michael returned to his family, a fierce sense of resolve in his chest. He gathered Cynthia and Samuel, explaining what he'd discovered. "We have the proof," he said, his voice steady. "There's no way they can ignore this now." Samuel looked relieved, but still shaken. The trauma of the shark incident had left him withdrawn, and Michael could see the toll it had taken on his usually bright, lively son. He placed a reassuring hand on Samuel's shoulder. "This is almost over, son. You're safe now, and that man will pay for what he did." That night, Michael drafted a formal complaint against the lifeguard and the cruise line, detailing the sequence of events, the lifeguard's actions, and the staff's dismissive response. He included the footage as evidence, building a strong case that left no room for doubt. He would not only demand justice for his son, but also ensure that no other family would have to endure such treatment. As he filed the report with the ship's administration, he made it clear that he intended to pursue legal action upon their return to shore. The ship's management, sensing the gravity of the situation, reluctantly agreed to expedite the investigation, though Michael could see the discomfort in their faces. They knew they had mishandled the situation, and the weight of their negligence was beginning to press upon them. When he returned to the suite, Michael found Cynthia waiting for him, her expression a mixture of worry and pride. "Do you think they'll actually do something?" she asked. "They don't have a choice," he replied firmly. "They can't sweep this under the rug, not with the evidence we have. We're going to hold them accountable, Cynthia." That night, as they prepared for bed, Michael felt a sense of accomplishment, a reassurance that he was finally taking control of the situation. But deep down, he knew that their journey wasn't over yet. The ship's administration might bend to his demands now, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that they would try to cover up the incident once they were back on land. However, he was ready for whatever came next. This was more than just a personal vendetta. It was a matter of principle, a fight for justice, and he would see it through to the end. With a newfound sense of resolve, Michael lay beside Cynthia, his mind racing with plans for what lay ahead. As they drifted to sleep, he felt Cynthia's hand in his, her silent support a steadying force. They were united in this battle, and he knew that, no matter the outcome, he would stand by his family, ready to protect them at any cost. The next morning, the ship's administration announced that a formal investigation would be conducted regarding the lifeguard's behavior. Michael, relieved that his complaint had been taken seriously, was determined to keep a close eye on the process. He knew that a thorough investigation would expose the truth, but he also understood the potential for a cover-up. Over the years, he had seen too many cases dismissed or downplayed to protect the interests of large companies. Despite the investigation, the atmosphere on the ship remained tense. The Turners continued to notice the cold stares and whispers that seemed to follow them wherever they went. The staff members still avoided them, and even some passengers seemed to steer clear, their expressions betraying quiet disapproval. Michael could see the toll it was taking on Cynthia and Samuel, but he urged them to remain strong, reminding them that justice would soon be served. Later that day, the family was summoned to a private meeting with the ship's senior officers and the head of security. When they entered the meeting room, Michael held his family close, their presence a reminder of the reason he was fighting so hard. The head of security, a tall man with a solemn expression, introduced himself and invited them to sit. "We want to assure you that we're taking this matter very seriously, Mr. Turner," he said, his tone professional but guarded. "We have reviewed the security footage, and it's clear that there was a violation of protocol. The lifeguard in question will be questioned thoroughly and will ensure that appropriate actions are taken." Michael nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "I appreciate that, but I want more than assurances. My son was deliberately endangered. I want to know that this investigation will go beyond just this one individual. We've encountered hostility from multiple staff members on this cruise, and I believe there's a larger issue at play." The officer's expression tightened slightly. "We're focusing on the lifeguard's actions as part of this incident, Mr. Turner. While I understand your concerns, we have protocols in place, and we intend to follow them." Michael's patience was wearing thin. "Protocols or not, this is about accountability. I expect a full report on every detail of this investigation, and if it isn't thorough, I'll take further legal action. I'm not here to be pacified. I'm here to ensure my family's safety." The head of security exchanged a glance with one of the officers beside him before nodding slowly. "Understood, Mr. Turner. You'll receive a full report as requested." Satisfied for the moment, Michael left the meeting with his family, though he remained cautious. He knew there was more to uncover, and he wouldn't rest until every detail was brought to light. Over the next 2 days, Michael took matters into his own hands, speaking discreetly with other passengers who might have witnessed the lifeguard's actions or the general treatment his family had received. Many were reluctant to talk, but a few offered quiet support, hinting that they, too, had noticed the pattern of discrimination on board. One older couple admitted that they'd overheard the lifeguard making disparaging comments about the kind of people he believed didn't belong on a luxury cruise. Michael documented each account, building a case that went beyond a single incident. He knew that his son's life had been put at risk not because of carelessness, but because of a deliberate act driven by prejudice. With each new detail he gathered, he grew more determined to hold the cruise line accountable. Finally, the head of security called them back for a follow-up meeting to present the findings. Michael, Cynthia, and Samuel entered the room with a renewed sense of purpose, prepared to hear the conclusions of the investigation. The officer greeted them with a measured expression, holding a file in his hands. "Mr. Turner, Mrs. Turner, Samuel, thank you for coming. After a thorough investigation, we've come to some findings regarding the lifeguard's conduct." He opened the file, skimming through the pages before speaking. "Based on witness accounts, along with the video evidence, we have determined that the lifeguard violated our safety protocols by not only disregarding proper procedures, but also engaging in actions that placed Samuel at significant risk." Michael felt a sense of vindication, but remained silent, waiting for the officer to continue. "Furthermore, we have confirmed that the lifeguard acted out of personal prejudice, and we are terminating his employment effective immediately. He will be removed from the ship at the next port, and additional disciplinary measures will follow." Cynthia exhaled a quiet sigh of relief, reaching for Michael's hand. Samuel looked up at his father with a faint smile, reassured that justice was finally being served. The head of security paused before adding, "We understand the severity of this incident, and we sincerely apologize for the distress it has caused your family. We assure you that we will be implementing additional sensitivity training for all staff members to prevent any recurrence of this nature." Michael listened, his mind processing the officer's words. While the termination of the lifeguard was a step in the right direction, he knew that true accountability required more than an apology and a promise of future improvement. "I appreciate the actions you've taken," he replied, his voice steady. "But this goes beyond a single staff member. My family has been treated poorly by multiple people on this cruise, and it's clear there's a broader issue. I expect that this investigation will address the conduct of every individual involved." The officer nodded. "We understand your concerns, Mr. Turner. Rest assured, we will review the conduct of all relevant staff members. Additionally, I can confirm that any individuals found to have acted inappropriately will face disciplinary action. We aim to create a safe and inclusive environment for all passengers." Michael held the officer's gaze, sensing a mix of sincerity and corporate caution in his tone. "Thank you," he said, though his mind was already focused on the next steps. He would not stop until he had concrete evidence that the cruise line was committed to addressing the deeper issues at hand. As the family left the meeting, Michael felt a mixture of relief and lingering determination. They had won a battle, but the war was not yet over. He had secured justice for Samuel, but the discrimination they had endured was not something he could ignore or simply forgive. His instincts as a judge compelled him to see this through, to ensure that real change would come from their ordeal. Back in their suite, Michael sat down with Cynthia and Samuel, sharing a quiet moment of relief. "This isn't the end," he said softly, looking at each of them. "But we've taken a big step forward. No one should have to go through what we did." Samuel nodded, his expression resolute. "I know, Dad. I'm glad you fought for us, for me." Cynthia placed a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. "You've done more than just protect us, Michael. You've made a difference, and that's what matters." Michael took her hand, grateful for her unwavering support. He knew that this experience would leave a lasting impact on them, but it had also brought them closer together, solidifying their bond as a family. He glanced at Samuel, seeing in his son a quiet resilience that filled him with pride. They had weathered the storm together, and no amount of prejudice or injustice could ever break their spirit.